Back in 2011, which I guess was Pearl Jam's supposed 20th anniversary of existence, Cameron Crowe produced this sort of documentary film called Pearl Jam 20, which was revised more recently, and it was called The Kids Are 20, which is a reference to The Who. That's a reference to The Who, The Kids Are All Right. I've spoken about the connections that I have discerned between The Who and Pearl Jam, and I reached that conclusion purely through symbolism and sound of the music. I didn't know that Eddie Vedder was actually friends with Pete Townsend, and that Eddie Vedder was once called a literal Pete Townsend written character. So I'm not saying this means I'm psychic or anything. I'm just saying that this tells me that I'm on the right track when I'm following the symbolism. This is just one little thing that shows me that I know, I recognize the commonalities here. So what does that prove? I don't know. Proof is a really stringent word that I don't like to just throw around. Fact, proof. I try not to throw these words around lightly. When I'm presenting a theory, I like to say this is a theory. If it's a fact, I'll say it's a fact, but I want to be sure it's a fact before I even attempt to say that. Anyway, so I watched this film, not The Kids Are 20, but I watched the original version, I believe. I found it for free online, and I wanted to just talk about some of the observations I had on that. Now, first of all, I want to talk about Cameron Crowe, the guy who produced it. He's the same guy who produced that Singles film, which I thought was terrible. I mean, I thought it was just badly done. My theory about the sea of bad movies, B movies, that you watch and you go, why was this made? My theory about a lot of these films is that they all play little parts in a larger social engineering. And in the case of Singles, I would say that it was very much created to sort of direct and cultivate the whole grunge culture thing and to sort of make it mainstream. You have people like Eddie Vedder and even Chris Cornell and all these various prominent individuals in the grunge scene over history bringing up the same kind of popularity versus underground, integrity versus selling out. And that's at the core of a lot of the grunge thing. It's like they took the punk ethos and tried to sort of manufacture it in a new way, to sort of hand feed it to the masses. So anyway, getting back to this guy, Cameron Crowe, I think that his job was actually, well, it literally was, to sort of document and help cultivate this grunge, early 90s Seattle grunge scene. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on Cameron Crowe because I could spend all day just talking about him and what I think he might be up to. But he is the youngest writer ever for Rolling Stone. Back in the 70s, he started writing for them, and I think he was only like 16 or something. And he toured with bands, and if that sounds kind of familiar, it's because they made a film out of it called Almost Famous. That was allegedly about him. And so I just want to talk about this film Fast Times at Ridgemont High for a minute. At age 22, he, Cameron Crowe, came up with the idea to pose undercover as a high school student and write about his experiences. Simon & Schuster gave him a contract, and he moved back in with his parents and enrolled as Dave Cameron at Claremont High School in San Diego. Reliving the senior year he never had, he made friends and began to fit in. Though he initially planned to include himself in the book, he realized that it would jeopardize his ability to capture the essence of the high school experience. His book, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, A True Story, came out in 1981. Crowe focused on 6 main characters: a tough guy, a nerd, a surfer dude, a sexual sophisticate, and a middle-class brother and sister. He chronicled their activities in typical teenage settings: at school, at the beach, at the mall, where many of them held after-school jobs, and concentrated on details of their lives that probed into the heart of adolescence. Okay, so imagine you're in high school, and there's some guy that's just seems like a regular guy. And you find out years later he was a plant. He was pretending to be a student, and he was actually older and was writing a story about it. I mean, it all sounds very innocent in this kind of a context, but think about it in a different way. Think about it when you were at the club the other night, or your college class you took the other day, or somewhere you went with a friend you met at the club or college. I mean, these people could be plants too. And I'm not saying we should all be paranoid and we should all assume everyone's a plant. The point I'm trying to make is that it's so easy for us to believe that something like this can happen in the past in a context like this. But as soon as you start mentioning, to someone that this is going on in their school or their classroom, they look at you like you're nuts. Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. You think, that we never went to the moon, and you think the earth is flat, right? So I'm just trying to paint a picture of how much we've been conditioned to not think critically and where we are today, and how it's actually becoming a problem, because we wouldn't even know if we were infiltrated, because we'd be too afraid to admit it, because we'd be more afraid of how our friends would see us than we would of just acknowledging the fact of like, hey, who's this dude over here, So obviously I have lots of questions about who Cameron Crowe really is and how much of what they're telling us about him is actually true. But obviously the whole grunge movement was a kind of manufactured thing, part of a big cultural engineering operation, as pretty much every scene is. The heavy metal scene, the hip hop scene, you name it. The people controlling this world and controlling this country, they know they have to control the culture. And whether you want to believe it or not, they're doing it. And they're going to make sure their people are in charge, and anyone who's going to try to mess it up is going to be eliminated, or they're going to be made obsolete. I can't say this documentary really contained very much revelatory information. All it really did was enforce a lot of the thoughts I already had about Pearl Jam and about grunge in general. The documentary focuses a lot on the very early era, the era of 10, the first Pearl Jam album. And I've noticed that a lot of documentaries like this, it seems that their real purpose, and when they're done on anniversaries and things, their real purpose is not necessarily to tell you what happened, but to reinforce the narratives they want you to believe about what happened. So, I'm not going to sit here and pick this apart and say this is a lie, that's a lie, because I don't really know. But what did kind of emerge from me watching this documentary, was the ultimate narrative, the ultimate objective in the minds of those theoretically behind the scenes and directing everything. And the story of Jeremy really sums it up, I think. The idea is you've got a tormented kid, tormented young man, and tormented youth. He's been mistreated by the world, and he's a victim. So you take a victim, you put that victim on stage or in front of a classroom, and then that victim expresses the fact that he's a victim. And he cries to the world, he screams and shouts, and we all watch him, and we all get moved and disturbed, and we want to help him. But then he sort of triumphs, and there's like these cathartic moments where where he starts winning, and so we're cheering along with him. So you have this dynamic. A singer of this kind of band is really an actor whose job it is to enact exactly what I just said over and over in different ways, as many different ways as possible. And in a way, I think that was Jim Morrison's job in the 60s, although he was actually an actor. It has come out that Jim Morrison, when he lived in Florida before he even moved to California, was an actor. And he moved to LA, we think for film school, but maybe more specifically, he was supposed to be an actor, and maybe that's exactly what he did. He acted. And then when his job was finished, they got rid of him. And so Eddie Vedder, with this Jeremy story, which interestingly is based upon a true story. They show the article here. I believe this is Richardson, Texas. And Jeremy Wade Dell 16, walked in front of the class and killed himself. And so Eddie Vedder talks about how the song Jeremy is partially about that, but it's also partially about another kid who he bullied in school, or bullied him or something. I forget the whole story, but ultimately you've got a kid going in front of the classroom and blowing his head off, and it's, I don't know. I mean, you're trying to make art, but it's a very mixed message. I mean, you can't control how people are going to respond to something, but when you're at this level of popularity and you put something like that, you depict something like that in such a graphic way, and now I'm backing up and I'm looking at Kurt Cobain, I'm looking at Chris Cornell, and I'm looking at Andrew Wood, and all these dead people. Lane Staley, you know, is this the game? You know, you get all fucked up and then you die in front of everyone, sort of sacrifice to the cause of whatever, I don't know, entertainment, trauma, to traumatize the population and encourage them to do the same. Oh, I've got problems too. Oh yeah, I got picked on in school too. Oh, I've got a mental illness. Now, I'm not trying to be insensitive to people who have mental illnesses. I've dealt with it. You know, it's no joke. It's a real thing. You think of Nathan Gale, the guy who killed Dimebag Darrell, or Chapman, who shot John Lennon. I mean, these are sick people. The problem is we, you know, the quote-unquote regular people, we need to start recognizing that, and they can be controlled into doing these things, then the media will make it look natural. You know, apparently he didn't want to be in Time magazine. He didn't want to participate in an interview. And he talks about in this film how him and Kurt Cobain spoke about it, and they both said, no, we're both not going to do it. And then he makes it sound like against his will he was put on the cover. Now look at this. All the rage. Angry young rockers like Pearl Jam give voice to the passions and fears of a generation. So this is their narrative. This is what they're selling. You're angry young rockers and Pearl Jam, and he's your voice. You know, he's the voice of your generation. I mean, to say that he was reluctant in this role was an understatement. But this is how he's being used. This is how he's being framed. This is what he was groomed to do. And the question is his story even real? I mean, or is his story real, but it was more contrived than it appears? Is Eddie Vedder sort of in the dark about what his role is, what his role really is, and why he was really elevated to the level he was? You know, I mean, if you take a rat and you slap it around a bunch, and then you throw it in a maze and watch what it does, I mean, the rat isn't acting, right? The rat really is disoriented and confused and looking all messed up. But it's a contrived situation. It's a laboratory, you see? So I'm proposing that all of this is a script with improv included, if you will. You know, let's throw this guy, Eddie Vedder, into this band, and let's see what he does, and let him improvise, and we'll sort of slap him around and guide him when he's getting too close to this wall or that wall, or we'll poke him and make him run through there. And that's exactly how they act, and that's exactly their message on Versus. They're just lab animals, right? Despite all their rage, they're still just rats in the cage, as Billy Corgan put it. So again, what's the purpose here? To tell you, this is what you are, be this. I mean, they're selling you the idea that the only way you can make a difference in the world is to lose your mind and beat yourself up and blow your head off and emotionally explode. But I mean, that's not the only way to make a difference. I mean, how about just keeping your head on straight and doing things the right way? I'm not suggesting that that's me. I certainly, you know, I'm probably a lot closer to Eddie Vedder than I am to, you know, a successful lawyer or a successful stock trader. But I mean, it's like the celebration of chaos, the celebration of abuse, the celebration of turmoil. And, I can have these thoughts and I can still enjoy the music. And I know it sounds like I'm kind of shitting on the whole thing. And maybe I am. But I don't know. I'm just tired of seeing all these people die. Surely someone like Eddie Vedder has access to the same Freedom of Information Act documents that I have. He goes on about how much he loved Chris Cornell. Chris Cornell was very instrumental in introducing him to the Seattle scene. And he doesn't think his death was suspicious at all. I mean, we can't just sit and wait around for people like him and Tom Morello to speak up and say something. And they say, let sleeping dogs lie, or let the dead rest in peace, or blah, blah, blah. I don't want to hear any of that, because these murderers are still at large. And if you want more people to die, just keep listening to Temple of the Dog and, oh, it's so beautiful, it's such a wonderful tribute. Okay, that's great. I'm not trying to shit on that, but what are we going to do to find out who is taking these people out? And I'm not saying Andrew Wood was for sure murdered. I think there may be some foul play there, but as I said in an earlier blog, I couldn't, the documents don't exist anymore. They were destroyed. So it's very difficult to research. This was kind of interesting. We saw a picture of Eddie Vedder's father in the film. Eddie Severson. Here's a picture of him. And apparently he did die when Vedder was just young. So he only met him a couple times. And he was told that he was just a family friend. Doesn't really go into the explanation. Kind of looks like he's in a band here, right? Or an actor. There's a lot the film doesn't talk about. I mean, this guy looks like he might have been a pretty interesting person with an interesting history. But, part of the reason they probably don't go into it is because they want to make it seem like they're revealing a lot of information. Like, oh, wow, there's a picture of Eddie Vedder's dad. Never thought I'd see that. But meanwhile, they're not going into who he is at all. He could have been a freaking CIA guy. I don't know. Maybe he was a hitman. Maybe he was, part of MK Ultra. See, because these extra layers would reveal, would destroy the narrative of Eddie Vedder, the tortured soul who just, rose up and rose to fame just organically by surfing and just happened to be friends with a guy in the Red Hot Chili Peppers and all this. It's entertainment, and it's entertainment taken to a degree to where they put it right next to reality, and then we can't see where the line is drawn. And so then they go, all right, now we've got them right where they want them, and let's make this guy, kill himself. And then a bunch of kids will do the same thing, right? I mean, it sounds very sick, but, there's two ways to look at all this tragedy. It's just natural and that's just the way it is, or it's been helped along the whole time and encouraged by evil people behind the scenes. Here's a picture of Eddie Vedder hugging Pete Townsend, who, has some questionable aspects to him. I mean, apparently he got in trouble with having some child porn on his computer. And I think his excuse was, oh, I was just, buying it to see if it could be bought so I could then do something about that, because that's not cool. I mean, maybe that is what he was doing, but it sure doesn't sound very convincing. It also doesn't help that he wrote a song called Rough Boys, and he dedicated it on the album to the Sex Pistols and his children. And a sex pistol is a penis, okay? So he dedicated the song where he basically came out of the closet, that he's into young men, rough boys. A boy is a boy, not a man. So he dedicates that to his children and a penis, you see? So, and there's Eddie Vedder hugging him. So again, I don't want to ruin everyone's vision of who Eddie Vedder is. I'm sure he's a very nice guy. But I don't know. I think when you're caught up in this industry, I think there's so much evil everywhere that one could probably walk through it and feel like you're separate from it. But I feel like we don't really know who any of these people really are. By the way, if you want to know more about the real Jeremy, there's this pretty interesting website called jeremywadedell.com. And you get to know a little more about the person and how they view the song.